Well, for a while there, it looked like the 270 was on its way out. But good news, I think Browning just gave it a new lease on life. Fast twist rifling for the 270 Winchester. Well, everyone, good news. If you love the 270, it's probably not dead yet. We have been asking for fast twist barrels in the 270, for decades. And finally, someone responded. Browning is offering it in a 7.5-inch twist. That is going to stabilize the longest 270 bullets currently on the market. And we're going to find out today exactly what that does for the ballistic performance of the 270 Winchester. Now, a little quick history. Of course, the 270 has been around since 1925. It was widely known as a flat-shooting, really fast cartridge. It's not all that fast by today's standards, but you can drive a 130 grain bullet 3,100 feet per second, maybe hit 3,200 feet per second with a 26-inch barrel. And the 150s will go 2,900, maybe 3,000 with the right barrel. So like I say, not all that fast when we have cartridges pushing 3,500 and 36 and 38. But it is still a great mild shooting deer round, figured to be kind of the ultimate mule deer cartridge and certainly the ultimate mountain sheep cartridge. Jack O'Connor was always harping on that. But it was also used for all kinds of other big game, including elk and moose, and even all of the bears, including the big brown bears and the polar bear. Obviously not the best option, perhaps, and that is why so many people wanted faster twist barrels so they could shoot longer, heavier bullets to get more energy. So we are going to look at what the 270 as it stands now, but with the new modern high BC long, heavy bullets will do with its relatively small powder capacity. And we're going to compare it with some of its modern competition that I thought was probably going to help drive it off the table. And of course, you've got to remember the Weatherby 270 Magnum. That has been around since the 1940s, and it never buried the 270 Winchester. The 270 Winchester is a lot more powerful, even though the 270 Weatherby Magnum will push another 300-400 feet per second in those bullets. And then came the short Magnum 270 WSM, which I really enjoyed, have good luck with on a lot of big game, including moose. But that one is kind of losing out because of the lawsuit business that was going on, and they're just not chambering that many rifles for it anymore. I still think it's a great option. Then came the big 27 Nosser. That's pretty recent stuff, but boy, that is even beating the 270 Weatherby Magnum. And then there's the new 6.8 Western from Winchester, and that one is really comparable to the old 270. It shoots a little bit faster, but obviously it was set up to handle all those sleek, high BC long bullets. And so what we're trying to do by speeding up the 270 Winchester's barrel twist is come close to that 6.8. We're going to see what those numbers do. And then on the horizon here, very shortly, should appear the 277 Fury. And that is the 308 neck down to 27, obviously, given a steel head on it so it can withstand more pressures. And then the rifles built for it can take up to 80,000 PSI pressure. That's how it increases its velocity. But that's kind of a specialty item right now, and I don't know just how well it will take off and if you have to have a special rifle to shoot it, like the Sig Sauers. So that one, and I think all the rest of these we can take off the table, except for the 270s lined up here. And as you know, there are a lot of different bullets on these, but they're all peaking out at 150 these days. You used to be able to buy some 160s, and for a time there were even some 170s, but these were always relatively short, round nose bullets. Don't have a high ballistics coefficient necessarily with those, but they do have more energy for close range targeting. And I think that's the idea behind them. If that was what they wanted for moose or elk at close distances where you wanted a lot more penetration. Got a pretty high sectional density in those long bullets. But by long bullets these days, we're looking at sleek things like this. That is the Extreme Outer Limits 170 grain 277 bullet from Berger. Incredibly high BC on that guy. Now this one is not really a 270 bullet, but I wanted to list it as an example of the all copper bullets that are coming on strong. And so many of us don't shoot those in our standard twist barrels because we still think we need to keep the weights up to match the ones with the lead core. But that means you're going to have a lot longer bullet, and then it won't stabilize. So you cannot shoot a 150 grain all copper bullet in your 270 standard 1 in 10 twist barrel. It won't stabilize. You're going to drop way down to probably 130s, pull it off. This is representing, it's really a 28 caliber here, but this represents the hammer bullets equivalent in a 270, which would be 139 grains, and we're going to look at that. So both of these bullets we'll be looking at in our tail of the tape. And here it is. We've got several of them. Starting right off at the top of the 270 and the 150 grain Accubon long range. They list the BC on that as 0.591. They used to list it even higher at 0.62 or something like that, but it was proven to be a little bit generous with their BC, and this might even be a little bit more. Always remember, folks, that each individual rifle will change the BC of that bullet a little bit. It might be that it roughs it up a little bit more. It might be that it doesn't quite perfectly stabilize it coming out, and that means the bullet is nodding and yawing and wobbling a little bit till it settles down, and it's got more friction, more air drag. So you lose a little bit of your BC. But we're going to go with the numbers from the book here just for comparisons. I think we'll be pretty close. Obviously, again, I'm shooting at a 6-inch target, going for my maximum point blank range. Going to compare the recoil on all of these in an 8-pound rifle. Most of us will take about a 7-pound rifle. One time we're all ready with a scope on it and loaded up in a sling, you're at 8 pounds or so. So that's a pretty fair comparison there. And then we'll compare 139 grain hammer bullet, and then the 165 grain Accubon long range, and then we're going to the 170 grain Extreme Outer Limits Elite Hunter from Berger, and then we're going to see what the 6.8 Western and the 27 Nosler do with those same bullets. So, starting with that 150 ABLR, 2,918 feet per second, and that's going to develop muzzle energy of 2,836 foot-pounds, more than plenty for elk and moose and all the big stuff, obviously, but that's at the muzzle. We're going to find out what it does downrange. Recoil you're going to get off of that one is 22 foot-pounds, fairly similar to what you'd get from, say, a 30-06 with a 150 grain bullet, or maybe a 308 Winchester. And the maximum point blank range on this one, I was going to say reach because that's what it is. The maximum point blank reach for that 6-inch target will be 294 yards. Pretty nice. So at 100 yards, you're 2.7 inches high. There's just a little more than a half inch of wind deflection, 2,537 foot-pounds of energy still left in that. So plenty of energy there. Out to 300 yards, 3.2 inches of drop, 4.9 inches of wind deflection, 2,015 foot-pounds of energy, still more than enough for elk. Anyone who says the 270 isn't big enough for elk, I don't think is considering these numbers. A lot of guys will say 1,500 foot-pounds is probably minimum for elk. You want to get at least that much on your elk. And you've got over 2,000 here with your 270. And that's just your traditional, been around since 1925 270. Stretch it out to 600 yards now, it starts to suffer a little bit. You're down to 1,393 foot-pounds of energy. I still think that's more than enough with the right bullet to cleanly take an elk or a moose. So you've got 21 inches of wind deflection starting to pile up a little bit, 57 inches of drop. Just the things that we deal with our laser rangefinders and knowing our trajectories. Now, let's compare that to that 139 hammer copper bullet, because I found those to be really deadly, and I think a lot more people are starting to use copper bullets. There's so many new ones coming out, and I think that's kind of be the wave of the future. So the BC on this one, now notice it's G7 BC. What does that mean? I don't want to get into it now, but basically the G1 is the standard. But that was from the old days when bullets had flat bases and fairly rounded noses, not the sleek ogive types we've got these days, like these guys. So a more accurate comparison would be the G7 type. So that's what we did with the hammer, because that's what they have for their information. They list it with the G7 numbers. So the number is going to look really low at 0.237, but it's comparable to a 540 perhaps in the old G1 style. So don't get too worried about that. We're not comparing apples and oranges here, as guys often say. So 3,000 feet per second, that's the beauty of this lighter bullet. You can drive it so much faster. Your muzzle energy, 2,778. Man, that's getting awfully close to that 150. The recoil is less at 18.4 foot-pounds, and the maximum point-blank range is 296. Ooh, 2,000, wouldn't that be nice? That would really sell some cartridges there, guys. 296 yards. All right, so 100 yards, you're 2.6 inches high, 0.6 inch of wind deflection, 2,424 foot-pounds, 3 inches of drop, 5.9 inches of wind deflection at 300 yards, 1,822, still plenty to drop your elk, 58 inches of drop at 600 yards, 26 inches of deflection, so you've lost about 5 here to the 150 grain Accubon long range because of that higher BC number. And you're still hanging on to over 1,000, 1,140, plenty good enough for deer, sheep, and mountain goats, and all that good stuff. Now let's go to the 165 grain Accubon long range. Here's where we're stepping up to the modern bullets. This is why they put the fast twist barrel in those Brownings. And that's going to be in, let's see, that's probably going to be a 26-inch barrel, but don't hold it to me. It might just be a 24. Most of these numbers I developed with 24. So you might actually get a little bit more if you go with the 26-inch barrel. So that will be the X-bolt, and Browning has several variations of that with different barrel lengths, so pay attention. All right, so 165 grain bullets has a BC of about 6, 2,700 feet per second. Recoil 21.4, right in there. Point blank range 273 yards. You're going to lose a little bit. You're dropping a little bit more because of that heavier bullet, but you're going to improve the wind deflection. 2.8 inches high at 100, 0.6 deflection, 2,385. Get out to 300, 5.3 inches of drop in that bullet, 5.4 inches of wind deflection, 1,886 foot-pounds of energy. Obviously, that's what we're looking for with these heavier bullets. But notice the advantage in the wind deflection category there. And what I like is if my drop can measure up equal to my wind deflection, it makes it that much easier for me to remember my ballistic calculations. The drop is the same as the deflection in a 10-mile-an-hour right angle wind. That's sweet. 5.3 and 5.4, I like that. And then way out there at 600, you got 71 inches of drop, quite a bit more because of that heavier bullet. And the wind deflection, you're saving 3 inches over the 139 grain hammer, and you're hanging on to a little more energy, 1,284. So now we're stepping up to the really big one, the 170 grain. That's this guy right here, the EOL, Elite Hunter. 0.660 on your BC, really high, 2,650 feet per second. I got that extrapolated from an old Hornady manual. Hornady hand loading manual has load listed for 160 grain bullet and 180 grain bullet. So I extrapolated a little bit to get a balance to figure out what we would get for a velocity. So I think 2,650 feet per second is pretty reasonable. And that gives you 21 foot-pounds of energy on your shoulder, 270 yards for your maximum point-blank range. You can see the numbers at 100 yards aren't much different than all the rest of them we've been looking at. Get out to 300 to start appreciating the difference, 5.8 inches of drop, 5 inches of wind deflection, 1,929 foot-pounds of energy. Pretty nice. And at 600 yards, 72 inches of drop, 22 inches of wind deflection, 1,370. So that and the 165 are obviously pretty darn close because there's only 5 grains difference between them. But there's a little more advantage in the BC department on that 170 grain EOL bullet. Now let's go to that 6.8 Western. That I think is kind of the chief competition for the old 270. A lot of younger guys are going to want that. It's got the 30-degree shoulder. It's a straight walls, pretty sharp on the shoulder, and it's got those long bullets seated out and still fits into short action. They love that stuff. I don't get too excited about whether it's a short or long action. I mean, there's not that much difference, but it does save you a little bit of weight in your rifle, and they feel a little quicker and handier. It's not a big deal, but if it's what you like, you've got options. So what does that 6.8 Western do? Well, as I said, that thing was tailored for these bullets. And I find the 165 grain is just about the best because it has the highest BC without getting too heavy so that you slow the velocities down. 2,970 feet per second is what I've been recording on most of the ones I've shot over the chronograph. That gives you 3,232 foot-pounds of energy. Notice how much more energy that is than even the 150 grain bullet from the regular 270. And that is because of that extra velocity. As we often say, it's double the velocity and you quadruple the energy. So you really gain energy by cranking that speed up. 25 foot-pounds of recoil. It's getting a little stiffer. Maximum point blank range, however, is reaching almost to 300, 299 yards. Pretty impressive. So out there at 300, you only have 2.9 inches of drop. So figure 3 inches of drop at 300 yards, dead on hold. That's why your maximum point blank range is 299. And the wind deflection is only 4.7. Still 2,314 foot-pounds of energy. Man, that is more than the 170 grain EOL bullet was holding on to. And I think that's because you're starting to really push the envelope on your powder capacity here. Don't quite have enough powder to make it work. Drop is 54 inches at 600 yards. There's only 20 inches of wind deflection out there. And 1,615, you're still above that 1,500 foot-pounds of energy for elk. I can see why the younger guys and even some of us old-timers might be interested in that 6.8 Western. They really did improve the ballistics of the 270 with those higher weight bullets on that. Now let's go to the big guy, that Nosler. 270 Nosler is a real horse. That thing has just got volume. Gosh, I think that thing takes some 80-some grains of powder to drive these bullets as fast as it does. So we're going to jump right to that same high BC 165 grain bullet, 3,237 feet per second out of the muzzle for energy of 3,840 foot-pounds. That is a lot of energy out of a 270 bullet. Wow. But you're going to pay for it. 37 foot-pounds of energy recoil. Eek. Maximum point-blank range, way out there at 325 yards. Wow. So if you don't mind having a big rifle and a big cartridge, this will fit in a 30-06 length, by the way. But pretty fat, a lot of powder, a lot of recoil. But you're going to reach out there and touch someone. So if you want to deliver a lot of energy way down range, 27 Nosler will certainly do it for you. Once again, let's just jump right to 300. Only 1.2 inches of drop, 4.2 inches of wind deflection, 2,776 foot-pounds of energy. Woo. And way out at 600 yards, you still have just 43 inches of drop, 18 inches of wind deflection, and just about 2,000 foot-pounds of energy. So you're still way more the energy than you need for elk or moose or the big bears. As long as you've got a good bullet, the right bullet, a tough bullet that's going to penetrate that big stuff. Oops, wait a minute, guys. I took a look at this video and I realized I forgot to make the really astounding comparison that I saw between the original 150 grain and these new longer, heavier bullets. I mean, we've been assuming that if we could get a faster twist and stabilize these heavier bullets out of the 270, we would improve its performance. But look at the numbers. They don't seem to add up. The good old 150 grain load with that really sleek and high BC ABLR bullet from Nosler seems to be winning out over the 165 grain and the 170 grain. More energy, less wind deflection, less drop. I mean, I don't know that we need the fast twist barrels in these big ones. So let's look at those numbers real quick. Look at the 150 grain ABLR. That's something we've been shooting forever in the 270. And then compare it to the data on the 165 grain AccuBond long range bullet. Now I notice I've got the BC down as 600 and the Nosler manual is claiming 6.2. That is not a big difference. It doesn't make up enough difference here, so don't worry too much about that. But you might get the 0.62 BC out of that bullet. The important thing, though, is that the 170 grain EOL bullet is not producing more energy, even at the muzzle, compared to the 150. Muzzle energy, 2,836 foot-pounds for the 150 grain bullet, and it's only 2,651 for the 170 grain bullet. I think what we're coming up against here is limits on the powder capacity. We just don't have enough powder to push that big bullet fast enough to get the energies up there. Because of, as I always say, the standard is if you double the bullet's weight, you double its energy. If you double the bullet's velocity, you quadruple its energy. So keeping your velocity higher is making a bigger contribution to the energy than the mere weight of the bullet. I think that's what we're up against. So looking downrange at the 300 yards with a 170 grain bullet, we've got 3.2 inches of drop out of the 150 grain, almost twice as much, 5.8 out of the 170 grain, so you lose on drop. Wind deflection is about the same, 4.9 inches and 5 inches, so that windage is the same, but then look at the energy levels. 1,929 foot-pounds out of that big 170 grain bullet. It's a little bit higher, 2,015 out of the 150 grain. thanks to the better ballistic coefficient and starting velocity. Same thing out at 600 yards. Just look at those numbers. You've got less deflection, less drop, and a little bit more energy out of the 150 grain bullet. The same thing applies with the 165. So I think bottom line here is I think we may have been peaked out with the potential for the 150 grain bullet in that 270 standard cartridge for all these years. You might not need or take advantage of anything with the faster twist barrel. Now, there is a chance that the data I've gotten here on your velocities are not accurate. You might get more velocity out of your rifle with a fast twist barrel. This was just some data out of that Hodgdon manual. And they may have, who knows, every barrel's a little bit different. So do consider the possibility for that. It would be fun to get a hold of one of these Browning rifles with the fast twist barrels and just really do some testing and chronographing and see what happens. But boy, just based on the data and the numbers I came up with, I don't think there's anything wrong or ever has been with the 150 grain load in the standard 270 Winchester with a 1 in 10 twist. That is the story. Now, what you need to consider, of course, on this new fast twist 270 is if you want lighter recoil or more recoil. If you're willing to put up more recoil and you need to shoot a lot past 300 yards, I think you want to start paying attention to some of the newer and faster ones like the 6.8 Western or the 27 Nosler, or maybe down the road that 277 Fury, or go with the old 270 Weatherby Magnum. There are new options, but boy, for those of us who just absolutely love the history and romance of the 270 and that long, sleek, efficient-looking little cartridge, I think we've got a new lease on life. All you need is that faster twist barrel. Now, I imagine since Browning broke the ice here, others are going to follow. I've heard rumors that Remington, with its new Alpha rifle and its new Model 700s, may be going with faster twist barrels in it. And someone said Bergara, but I was not able to confirm that. I didn't see where Bergara was even chambering a 270, but maybe they've got something in the works. Savage, I would expect to come up with it because they often do faster twists. They've done it with the 22-250 in the past. So you might want to watch there. And hey, hold your favorite rifle maker's feet to the fire on this one. It never hurts to let them know you would love to buy one of their rifles if they would just make a small change like the twist in the barrel. It's not that difficult. And then your other option is to take your current 270 or any 30-06, a 280 Remington, anything that you could rebarrel easily, and get a barrel for it, screw it on, and get your fast twist barrel that way. Shaw Barrel Company is offering some fast twist barrels in 270, and they've got some really reasonable prices over there. They'll even mount it on your rifle for you. So those are your options for the 270, but keep your eyes open. I think we might start to see some factory loads coming out that say something different than 130, 140, and 150 grain on the bullet weights. We're going to be getting up there to the 160s all the way up to 170, maybe even 180 someday. That's the new life on the 270 Winchester. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time, hunt honest and shoot straight.